This is when people typically take their foot off the pedal and they go, oh, they're great, they're happy, they're fine, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to do it. But that's where the magic happens. That's where the skills are taught.
But that's really hard to tell a parent to do when they're like, yeah, but I know they can put their shoes on. They're just being a little dick and screaming and not putting their shoes on.
What if behaviour wasn't something to fix, but something to understand? Welcome to Behave, the podcast to relearn behaviour. We're Eleanor Brink and Erica Gleeson, advanced behaviour practitioners who believe it's time to do things differently. If you want to understand why behaviour happens and how to actually support it, you're in the right place. This is Behave, because when we know better, we do better.
Before we dive in, just a quick note. Everything we share here is shaped by our own clinical experience, lived experience, and the research we're guided by. We're always speaking in general terms, not giving individual advice. And we know every human and every nervous system is different. So take what fits for you, leave what doesn't, and always trust your gut. All right, let's get into it.
And episode 6. Here we are. Episode 6.
All right.
No,
I'm going to get the reputation of being a bitch.
Here we are. This episode is what we have titled Weathering the Storm.
Decided the title 1 second ago.
1 second. There was a bit of argy-bargy, but we got there. We want you to feel like these episodes are not only informative and that you go, oh, I didn't know that, but
fun
and hilarious and smart and all those things, but that you walk out of them feeling like you've acquired take-homes, that you're like, great, I can implement that today, or I'm really going to focus on that. So that's what this episode is all about, equipping you with your toolbox, starting to equip you with your toolbox.
Yeah, and we're going to, just because we're so kind, there is going to be a little downloadable escalation curve that I use in all my intakes. So don't even bother coming to Hype. Just have this freebie and make your own escalation curve, because it changed it. I've done many iterations of it.
Yep.
And I have it to a point where I love it.
I'm happy. I'm excited to see.
But it really does visually. If you're a visual learner, or if we're trying to break down the behavior can feel like one big lump, and it's not. There's typically multiple warning signs and early stages and what the profesh people call precursor behaviors that have happened before we get to this really big explosion. And where the curve helps us is it helps us map out all the different things that happen along the way before we get to the explosion, so that we are responding to these lower level behaviors.
Called precursor behavior, called indicators of escalation. So let's start with the escalation curve. And if you're just listening rather than watching, I want you to visualize like a mountain.
Yeah.
Right? So we've got the valley before the mountain that's pretty flat, and then the mountain starts to climb, and then you reach the peak of the mountain, and then the mountain inevitably has to come back down. That's typically what an escalation curve looks like on paper. It's not what they look like in reality, because
IRL.
What's IRL?
In real life.
Oh, in real life.
You'll know that I'm the younger of us too, because I'm pretty clued in with stuff like the acronyms.
And I'm about 30 years beyond what I am actually. I'm just an old haggard witch that's stuck in it.
No sleep will do that to you.
Exactly.
Actually, that was feedback I got, is that's very relatable. And also, one of my friends commented, how is Erica's skin so glowy if she never sleeps?
Oh, it's sunscreen. It's sunscreen, girl. Don't be fools. I'm also a walking skin cancer. So that's why my skin's glowing. But I love that feedback. What else you got? What else you got?
You're already on your horse.
Yes, we'll cover sleep another day. But
you're going to say we'll cover our skincare routine.
I mean, that's also easy. We could do that.
We will not do that. Okay, back onto the topic.
Where was I?
Okay, we were at our behavior.
It's not linear. It doesn't look like that in reality for most people. Typically, there's 7 mountains, and then it's a little mountain, and then a big mountain, and then it's all over the place, because what we often see is people never actually get back to baseline. So let's talk about the escalation curve, which is effectively an analogy which shows us what it looks like when the person is at baseline, what it looks like when the person's wheels are starting to fall off, what it looks like when they're at peak escalation, or the red zone, or the storm has come over, and then what it looks like when they're starting to enter what we call the recovery phase, and then back down to baseline. So we want to get a really clear picture what each of these areas look like for every person, and then the corresponding strategies that go along with it.
Yeah, and you'll often hear these broken down into colors. The zones of regulation is a classic one, which we'll talk about in a different episode as well, because I have lots of opinions. But you'll typically see, baseline is green, and then we're in the orange, and now we're peak at red, and then we've come back down to blue. It's not quite that simple. I've really like separating out this orange into a yellow and an orange. So the colors are helpful because I think they're used so broadly that a lot of the time people have already started to use that language. And so we don't want to come in and, change everything. So baseline being when we're happy, relaxed, engaged, regulated, our brain is online, all of these things, nervous system feeling good. I like to highlight that there's this yellow period. So it's not quite, we're not into the warning signs, but there's little bits and pieces that we're seeing that might indicate that something's starting to feel a little bit off. Maybe I can't engage in a task like I usually can, or I'm asking more questions, or I'm getting out of my seat a lot. Like things that we're like, these aren't an issue, but they're information to the people around you that maybe you're starting to feel a little jittery, a little bit dysregulated. Maybe a change of voice, a change of tone of voice can be common. And then it progresses. Typically then from there, we're going to a higher level, which is that orange, those warning sign behaviors, which are typically either slightly lower level or lower intensity responses to what we see at peak escalation. So it might be, yelling or swiping something off or swearing.
Whatever the most extreme case of the behavior looks like. So people often say to us, the person just went from 0 to 100. And for some people, they do have a really rapid escalation, but more often than not, what we see is that the early warning signs, so the yellow and the orange zones, if you want to use the color analogies, were missed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there were indicators of escalation, but for whatever reason, they were in a classroom setting or there was too many other things going on or whatever, we missed it. And the important thing to note is that if we can respond to people when they're in their yellow or orange zone in a way that meets their needs, they usually don't need to keep escalating to the red zone. So it's what we call breaking the escalation curve.
And this can feel really challenging for parents when we are asking you to actually reinforce a behavior. So we're saying, actually, this child, they'll scream as their warning sign, and then they might hit their head as their peak escalation. When they scream, I want you to give them what they want. Right? Because I want them to learn that all they have to do is scream and their needs will get met. They don't have to hit their head. But that's really hard to tell a parent to do when they're like, yeah, but I know they can put their shoes on. They're just being a little dick and screaming and not putting their shoes on. And the other option is, they hit their head. The risk is so high. We have to reinforce that anyway. So we want to reinforce the lower level behavior so that we don't have to.
Or the one I love, is people don't want to reinforce somebody yelling at them to fuck off. Because they're like, oh my God, that's so inappropriate, even though it's an adult. Instead, to the contrary, you don't reinforce that. They then punch you in the face and then you go, okay, I'm out of here. Right? So I'm like, no, if they tell you to fuck off, get the hell out of this. Yeah, I'm out. So tell them.
Self-advocacy, right?
Exactly.
I mean, we can, move towards a more socially appropriate response if needed, but
that's down the track.
Yeah.
Right now, just tell me what you need. So we need to understand what each of these areas look like. And this is where the downloadable will help you. You'll be able to start mapping it out. And what you see as an indicator of escalation or precursor behavior might look different to somebody else. So collaboration is really great on these tools, but it gives you some guidance on what it looks like. And then we can look at the requisite strategies for each one so that the individual doesn't have to reach the red zone every time to have their needs met, because then what typically happens is they reach the red zone, we respond, it's reinforced. They're like,
because we have to.
Because we have to. So I now know that this is what I have to do every time to have my needs met, which is full escalation.
And now I'm not going to go through those early warning sign behaviors, because when I scream, it actually doesn't get me anything. I'm going to jump straight to hitting my head because I know that's going to get my need met faster. And so sometimes when people do say, it came out of nowhere, a lot of the time there has been a warning sign, but sometimes the learner is like, well, I actually engaged in that precursor for so long and it didn't get me anything. So now I'm just going to go straight to the peak to get my needs met. And then we actually have to work our way back from that and build a more of a threshold or a greater window there to respond to. So yes, if one takeaway from all of that is, as a parent, if your child has a behavior escalation curve and you know their behavior can get much worse, don't feel bad responding to a lower level behavior. That's okay. We're going to tell you as well what you can do at the same time to be also like building a skill there so that you don't feel like you're just, giving in and rewarding the screaming. You're actually taking that as an opportunity to support them to learn to get that need met so that they don't have to escalate past it.
And we'll do another episode on skill development, but one of the things I really want to reinforce is that the skill development side of things doesn't happen when somebody's already on the way up, right? If somebody's at full escalation, if they're in what you might know as the red zone, they're having a full-blown outburst behavior, they're running away, they're hitting their head, whatever it looks like for the person, you've got Buckley's chance of teaching them anything. So when somebody is in the green zone or at baseline or they're in their regulated state like we are now, this is when people typically take their foot off the pedal and they go, oh, they're great, they're happy, they're fine, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to do it. But that's where the magic happens. That's where the skills are taught. That's where they're able to actually retain information. So
and I would argue even the yellow.
Yes.
Because what the yellow does is it allows us to see that something's kind of underlying shifting and we can match what we're going to teach to that internal response, right? We compare that relationship. So it's also going to be mapped to triggers, right? So if you can see, I can see that my child is looking over at that truck. I'm really into trucks this episode and last. I can see they're looking over to that truck and they're getting a little antsy. That might be your yellow sign behavior, but you can then jump in and be like, oh, I can see you looking at that truck. I wonder if you want to turn at that truck, you could do this to get access, right? And so we've seen that they're motivated for that. They're not maybe green, but they're slightly a little yellow, but they're definitely not dysregulated.
Yeah.
And that's a great opportunity for us to teach something that's going to help them get their needs met without them having to engage in the behavior.
Yeah. We see too often like people that are escalated and in their behavior support plans or just the strategies that are in place, people are saying like, use your words. Just tell me what you need. You need to calm down. You need to be still. When we get to the red zone, the big moments, the storm, we have a focus on safety and we have a focus on co-regulation. But don't ask the person to access skills that have just completely gone offline. They've probably even forgotten about the reason that they escalated in the first place because their reptile brain has taken over, right? So don't look at the red zone as a teaching opportunity or a time when somebody's going to be able to explain anything to you, where you're going to be able to say, look, let me explain to you why we can't go to the shops right now. You can't rationalize at that point. So this is where the focus has to be on the green and yellow and orange zone, because when you get to the red zone, your strategies are actually pretty limited.
Orange, I would even say, like how I typically like to show it is like your strategies are going to decrease as you get higher up. So green and yellow, we've got a ton.
Yeah.
As we're getting to orange and then definitely to red, we're pulling back, like less is more at that point, because typically you're just going to make it worse with whatever you're doing.
So let's talk about the power in the pause. You added that one, so you could talk about that.
What did I mean?
Sure.
Okay, wait. Yes, I do know what I meant. Okay. The power in the pause. So a lot of the time, what I will say is somebody prompting a response or placing an instruction or trying to tell someone to do something like bam, 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 when they're not responding, right? So say we are in that yellow zone and you see that little Jamie looking at the truck and he's really wanting it. And I'm like, okay, you can say truck. Can you T? And you're like, you've told him to say truck in 5 different ways in the space of like 45 seconds. And he's like, hasn't processed any of this.
And now he's actually just overstimulated.
Yeah. And now I'm like, woman, stop talking. I'm looking at that truck, right? There's so much power in the pause. When we place an instruction or when we prompt a response that we want our learner to use, we need to prompt and we need to pause and we need to give processing time.
Up to 20 seconds is not uncommon. Yeah.
And watch for their response, right? Like if you prompt and then they look at you and you're like, cool, I can see you're engaging with me. Perfect time to prompt again. But if they're ignoring you, don't just keep talking. That's what I wrote. It's power in the pause.
Power in the pause, you're making it worse. So we love our proactive strategies. We know that that's where the work is done. When we understand the why, we can put the proactive strategies in place.
What do we mean by proactive strategies?
Proactive strategies, like an example of a proactive strategy is what we call antecedent management. So we talked about triggers and antecedents and how some people say antecedent, and that really grinds our gear. If we know what the antecedents are, some of the time we can actually manage them in a really, really proactive way. So for instance, I work with an individual who finds it really difficult when the fridge beeps because his mum is putting away the groceries and the fridge beeps to say it's open for too long and he's like cannot handle that.
Yeah.
So a really common sense, proactive antecedent control strategy would be get the groceries delivered when he's not home. Right. Don't worry. I did look into whether you could turn the beep
Okay,
off the
like
fridge.
literally, I'm like, I have a better solution. Does that make me?
That's not a thing in
Yeah.
this particular fridge.
Because sometimes that is, right? Like we call that environmental management. It's like, just remove it.
Just
like,
if you can manage it, great. Some of them you can't. Like say, for instance, I might lose my cool because a motorbike drives past and I can't control
motorbikes.
Yeah.
Just turn off all motorbikes. I think I'd solve like 50% of my problem.
Your dog certainly wouldn't be barking like that. So some of them we can manage, some of them we can't. But if we can prevent something occurring, why the hell wouldn't we? Right? If we can make life easier for somebody.
But then we're just removing all the things that make life hard and we're not teaching them anything.
We're not teaching them resilience. We're just accommodating, right? Accommodations are what makes people be able to develop resilience and to be able to develop skills. If you don't put them in place in the first place, you're never going to get anywhere.
I had a sister of a client so we were talking about this client has had quite a bit of staff turnover and we were talking about finding some good support workers to work with them. And I said, I've got someone great. They are going to be leaving in 6 months, but, I think they would be really good fit, blah, blah. And I was like, and then, it's a good learning opportunity. Like when they leave, that's a good learning opportunity. And she said to me, he has so many unplanned triggers in his life. He does not need you to plan a trigger. And it just like sunk into my brain. I was like, you're right. Like there are going to be unplanned people leaving and unplanned things that are going to come up for him. He lives in a world that doesn't fit his nervous system. Why am I putting something in place that, well, I wasn't actively putting it in place, but like it like made me pause and be like, you know what? You're fucking right.
A light bulb moment.
Yeah. And it's like for certain people who have so many environmental triggers for them, if we can just remove some of them, they're still going to come into contact with so many. Like we don't have to leave them in place to teach them how to tolerate. It's like that's actually doing the opposite in that their nervous system's probably overactivated a lot of the time. Anyways, that's just to say we're always learning.
Oh man, we've got a million of those stories. Like another example of a proactive strategy would be, let's just say I have 3 siblings and I engage in a behavior in order to get one-on-one attention with mum because mum pulls me aside and says, no, that's not okay. Go into the naughty corner, smack, 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 take your iPad off you. A proactive strategy there would be embedding in one-on-one time with mum so that the behavior is not reinforced by only getting that when a behavior occurs. So yeah, there's a million different proactive strategies. And as I said, we'll do a whole section on a whole episode on skill development, but it's effectively meeting the person's needs so that a behavior doesn't have to occur as much as we can. We manage as much as we can, right? Now let's talk about the role that visuals can play in that.
Visuals should be used for individuals that want them, that like them. Let's not throw a visual at every single person because we think it is going to solve all of our problems. Same with a social story.
How do they process information? How do they learn? That tells us the answer to whether they need a visual or not.
And let's not use visuals with adults when the adult finds that very belittling. So it's really important to match our strategies. If we are going to use a visual with adults, because I have some adult clients who, love a visual. They're like, can you give this to me in visual form? Great, but I'm going to make it age appropriate. Yes. I'm going to make it fit who you are. So visuals, I love a visual.
The research tells us that most people on the autism spectrum are visual learners. So that is why we tend to default to using visual information. But visual information doesn't need to be a child cartoon of somebody brushing their teeth. Like when we talk about visuals, that can look so very different.
And I think we also have to think of the purpose of the visual. So is the purpose that it is priming, which means it's telling the person what's coming? Is it that like, first we're going to do this and then we're going to do this? Or is it like a visual schedule of their day? Or is the visual meant to be used as a communication response? Are they meant to touch it to make a choice? Yeah, things can be used in lots of different ways. Visuals are amazing, but where I think there's an issue is when there's too many, when like literally every aspect of their life is littered with a visual and it's too much information, or when some kids have had a learning history where that visuals have been used in a ineffective way that may trigger them. So it's not just a brush we throw at everyone.
Yeah.
It's something that we personalize and we make sure it's getting the response we're looking for.
Purposeful.
Yeah. And providing choices. Like I'll typically, for my learners who I can, I'll have them make the visuals with me.
Yeah.
Because they're getting control. I'll pair language with the visual. So it's not just a picture. We've got words there too. But, you know, when we are looking at higher levels of that on our escalation curve, when we are looking at those higher levels, visuals are helpful because we are losing our processing power as we move up that curve and our rates of
reliance on visuals usually increases the more somebody's escalated because they're not actually able to process auditory information. So let's talk about what's happening in the brain when the storm has come.
I just chatted for 10 minutes about visuals. Go for it.
Well, we've talked a little bit about this already in previous episodes, but effectively what we're looking at is what we call the reptile brain taking over. So the brain has effectively gone into survival mode. So it's just trying to keep itself safe. It is responding to threats. It's not rational at that point. So it's not able to process information. It's not able to acquire new information. It's not learning anything. It's just in reactive, keep myself safe mode.
So if we think about our brain, how it's developed over time, we have our like survival brain, which is like our base level that is there to keep us alive. It is literally there to fight or flight, get us out of situations, keep our homeostasis, our breathing, all of that going. And then the next level on that is our social emotional brain. So that's the part of our brain that develops next, which is forming connections and relationships, building a community. That's also actually a protective factor, right? And then lastly, on top of that is what we call like our thinking brain, our problem solving brain. That's the first part to go. So if we work backwards, no thinking brain as we move up our curve.
The emotional stuff's gone. So all we're left with is the survival part of the brain. So now let's talk about the window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance is the space that we sit in the middle, where we are able to comfortably respond to things in our environment. And over time, our goal is to increase our window of tolerance. So for some people, their window is very, very short, which means something happens that they find aversive can create a big response for them.
Yeah. So if we think of it on our curve in terms of like our colors, it might be like, okay, our green and maybe like the top of our yellow is very skinny. Like there's no, as soon as the trigger hits, we're out of that zone. Yeah. Whereas if we have a greater window of tolerance, it means we can respond to triggers and tolerate triggers. While we might start to escalate, we can catch ourselves and implement a strategy to bring us back down, staying in our window rather than moving into hyperarousal or hypoarousal. That we wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I think that's enough. Revisit previous episodes for more information.
See episode 2.
So redirection of behavior is a very, very common strategy you'll see in most basic behavior support plans, and it's often overused in my opinion. You're only going to get some success with redirection if the person's not already pretty escalated, because the idea with redirection is you're usually redirecting them to a preferred activity or a preferred item or something. But then as we move up the escalation curve, the ability to process that information is gone. So when we see somebody being redirected to something when they're escalated, I'm like, well, that ain't going to work. That's a waste of time. That's actually just more words that they don't need at that point in time. Like it's just not going to work when somebody's in the red zone.
Red zone, yes, absolutely. I think redirecting behavior can be helpful when we're, you know how we talked about that orange, there's less strategies there. It can be helpful in that orange or lower levels, because what we can sometimes do is let them still engage in the response, but just in a slightly better version that we can tolerate. rather than, so say they are throwing the ball at the window repeatedly and you're like, that glass is going to break. I might just say, hey, let's throw the ball into this bucket, or let's throw it against the wall. Like a super easy redirect. Whereas if I had ended that behavior there, if I said, no, stop, give me the ball, that's going to pop them all the way up to the red.
Yep.
I can just do a little switch to say, here, just do it in this slightly safer way. And then once you've thrown it against the wall, then I can shape you down again to like, okay, now throw it to me. Great, now I'm actually doing a social interaction.
So the key there is that you have told the person what to do, not what not to do. So a lot of the time we see people saying, no, don't hit, don't throw the ball, don't do this. And it takes double the amount of cognitive capacity to then go, oh, she doesn't want me to throw the ball at the glass. What the hell am I meant to be doing?
They don't know what to do with your body.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we do a little exercise, if you're driving, don't do this, but we will do it here. My favorite exercise is if you close your eyes and you say, don't hit, or brain is you're visualizing hitting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you close your eyes and you say, oh, give me a high five, your brain is seeing giving a high five. It's telling your body what to do. My biggest pain point is when we say don't, we're not actually coaching the brain and body on what
on the alternatives
should be doing.
Yeah.
And then we're just leaving this person stuck in limbo of like, okay, well, I can't hit. So what the fuck am I meant to do?
Yep. So we see a lot of house rules, we see a lot of school rules, which are all based on the really negative language of what not to do. Okay, so now once we've got to peak escalation, we've talked about the fact like the more that we move up the escalation curve, the less strategies we have to work with. We then start to see somebody move down the escalation curve. That's when we usually see people go, let's give them an instruction, let's redirect them, let's do this, let's do that. But their nervous system wasn't ready for that. So then they back up. So this is where we see the escalations curve looking like a full mountain, like the Himalayas.
Yeah.
The full mountain range rather than them reaching recovery. But let's just say somebody does get back down to recovery, which could take minutes, could take hours, could take days.
Yeah.
But we have got some really objective signs that the person is back in recovery. We want to keep them there where they're back at baseline. So we just need to look at exactly what it looks like on the way down for them, what makes it better, what makes it worse, not putting too many expectations on them whilst all of those stress hormones are still pumping through their system and while they're probably dysregulated.
And I think I feel like the tricky part of recovery is that their observable behavior might start to look closer to that green, right? And you're like, whoa, they're not hitting or screaming anymore. They've cried now and we've kind of come out of it. All right, we got to get back into the day. Let's keep going. But while they're not engaging in a behavior, say, they're still not at baseline.
Yeah.
Because typically if we think about once we've gone all the way to peak, our nervous system is pretty fried. Like when typically not getting back to baseline even within an hour for most people. Most of my learners, if we're really getting all the way to peak and there's that extreme distress, like it's a good half day of like at least a couple hours of just having to come back down, which is why, again, we don't want to go all the way up to peak, right? If we're supporting it, that yellow or low orange, our time to get back to baseline and back to learning is actually so much shorter. So from a education point, or like if we're trying to teach, we're actually better off reinforcing that lower level behavior so we can get back to green and get back to skill building.
Yep.
Otherwise, we've gone all the way up to red and we're spending half a day coming back from it.
Here.
I just think like when you have a really hard day and like you've had lots of a big emotional episode and you feel like hungover sometimes. You're like, oh my God, I've got a headache. I just feel like, like shit. And sometimes like our learners, they're going to have that come down too, even if they can't express some of that internal stuff that's going on for them.
So for some people, you can work with them on this. You can get them to start identifying what it feels like in their body when things are starting to unravel for them. You can start to say, how does it feel in your body? Do you feel sick in the tummy? And for other people, they don't have the skills to be able to do that. So we create these escalation curves, sort of visuals on their behalf based on what we can observe. But you will have your own template. You can start mapping it all out. Map it out for you. Map it out for your child or the person that you're supporting. We would love your feedback on it and how helpful this is, because undoubtedly it will change your life.
And then just quickly on that, you can, once you've mapped the behavior, it's also then a really good tool to say, I'm noticing this. What's your body feeling? Like if they do have that interoception and that ability to label what's going on inside, when you do this, can we check in on what's going on internally for you? And then that can also be a really nice way to start building in the emotional vocabulary and expanding on that.
Yeah, the emotional literacy. Okay, this has been a long dog, this one. These last two episodes, probably my favorite topics to talk about. As you can probably tell by how long the episodes were, we did not stick to our 20-minute time frame, but that's okay. We hope it was full of the good stuff. Let us know your thoughts, give us some examples, stay in the loop, and we will see you in our next episode. We don't know what that's on yet, so you should tell us.
Maybe PDA.
Yeah, that's been a hot request. Thanks for joining. We will see you soon.
Bye.
Before we go, we'd like to acknowledge the Biripi people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we record. If this episode resonated, make sure you subscribe to Behave wherever you listen to your poddies, and follow us on Instagram for more conversations about behaviour. Our handle is @BehaveThePodcast. Thanks for being here. And remember, when we know better, we do better.